Texture and looking at artist research. Here's some resources you might need.
Hello. At this part of Module 3, we are going to focus on texture. So to get started, you need to select some artists who inspire you and give you some ideas. I'm going to focus on Huang Gui for this lesson, and I'm going to make a response to his work. Okay, so my focus is on Huang Gui. I'm going to start with getting some materials together. So I'm going to work on A5 paper for this task, and then I have got a selection of different papers which I intend on using. So I noticed that Huang Gui seems to use lots of different textures in his work, and a lot of his palette is very muted tones, so lots of browns and yellows. So I've gathered together some of those colours. I've got some sugar paper. So sugar paper is a really good paper to use. It's not too bright, it's not too stark, and it's quite muted, and it also works really well with pastel over the top because it's got a coarse texture, so it allows the pastel to stick to it a little bit easier. So that's a really good paper to use. I've also got this brown paper, which is actually some old recycling. It's from old packaging, which I've kept, thinking it might come in handy, and I think that it's quite fibrous, so I think that might create sort of an interesting texture. I've also got some parcel paper, which is textured. It's got like these lines. One side is usually more glossy than the other side is more textured, so you can make a choice in how you use that. And what I liked about this as well is if you take a look at Gris's work here, he uses a lot of wood effect. I don't know how he does that. I think sometimes it's the paper. I think perhaps he draws it on with charcoal in some instances as well. But I like the parcel paper because that's got that natural sort of grain in a similar way as well. So I'm going to use that. I've also got some corrugated card. I can see that he's got this sort of bumpy texture here. I think that's supposed to be like a blind or something like that. But I thought this sort of reminded me of that texture, so I'm going to use that. And then I also have some tissue paper. Tissue paper makes a really nice texture. You can use it crumpled or you can use it so nice and smooth. It's really up to you how you use that. So I've got some brown colours of the tissue paper in keeping with the artist's work. Okay, so on top of this I'm going to use charcoal. So I've got my charcoal here. I'm probably going to just use the compressed charcoal as opposed to willow. And then I'm also going to use pastel as well. So my soft pastels, the chalk pastels, I'm going to use because I can see that this artist probably uses that in some of his work. And I think that might be effective. I may even use some colouring pencils as well, just for a bit more control, but I'll see how I go. Okay, for this task I am not going to create a direct copy of any of the artist's work, but I'm going to use that for inspiration and get an idea on shape as I work. I'm also going to use my previous work as well as inspiration. Again, I'm not copying the composition exactly, but I'm just going to have that to hand just to get an idea on composition. Okay, to get started, we're going to make a basic collage just to fill this page. So I'm working, as I said, on A5 today, and I'm going to just focus on completely covering this white page, just to give me a starting point. So I'm going to start by using some brown paper. I'm going to use the parcel paper. For this task, I'm going to be using scissors, and I'm also going to be tearing as well. So I'm going to use these straight edges for the edges there. But then I'm also going to tear, and this is going to create texture. I'm going to use a craft knife and a ruler, and I'm also going to use a pair of scissors. I'm going to need a glue stick as well. Remember, this really depends on the artist that you've looked at, but any artist who is focusing on texture, this is a great exercise to get started with. Sometimes it's really hard to get started, and the best thing to do is just to create a really basic collage which you can then get inspiration from. Okay, once you've got a really basic collage and you've managed to fill the page and you've not got a lot of white space left, you can start using your resources, using your research, previous work to get ideas on composition and shape. So I'm looking at my previous painting I did earlier on in the module, and I've just cut out some shapes from that. So this is my fruit. I've noticed that Juan Gris uses a lot of newspaper, so I've decided to use some newspaper as well. It's important that I'm just using the text, so I'm just finding a newspaper with lots of text. It doesn't really matter too much what the text is about, but it's just going to add that extra interesting element that's going to make the viewer want to look in a bit more detail. So I'm going to use that as well somewhere in my composition. And it's also important to point out the fact that Juan Gris was actually a Cubist artist. So the Cubist artists, they were a group of artists who created work by looking at things from different angles and then replacing it in one piece. So a lot of their work comes across as quite flat because they've joined the different angles together in one composition. But I find it quite interesting because it looks really abstract, but then actually when you look very closely you can see that a lot of the subjects are the same item from different angles, which is quite intriguing actually. I particularly like Picasso. If you haven't seen Picasso's work, take a little look. He was very well known for his Cubist portraits, so it's just an interesting way of looking at your subject really. Okay, so I am going to now just make sure I have my painting, I have my research to get some ideas. Again, I'm not creating a direct copy, I'm just using this research to inform my ideas. But I'm going to get a little bit carried away now with trying to create a Cubist collage focusing on texture. Okay, there is my Juan Gris response based on previous work and research.